Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome to today's panel discussion, Flexible Working and the Modern Office, How Times Have Changed. I'm Patrick Brown, I'm a Senior Associate in Lewis Silkin's Real Estate Practice, and together with our expert panellists, we'll be discussing some of the possibilities to explore and the pitfalls to avoid going forwards, and the vital role the office will continue to play for ad marketing companies over the next few years. Just a couple of housekeeping points. We are recording this session today, and it'll be circulated after the event. Everyone is muted, but if you do want to raise any questions of our panelists, please do so in the chat section at the bottom. If you could address those to the host, presenters, and panelists, that would be great. We'd love to hear from you. We'll try and read some out near the end. As you can see on the slide, there's also some instructions for if you want to make the videos a bit bigger. You can see my expert modeling skills there. Also, you'll see there are ticks and crosses on the right-hand side of your screens. If you disagree or hopefully agree with anything we're saying today, please do click on one of those. It's great to hear what everyone's thinking, and hopefully you're on our side. Okay, so as there's some light at the end of the tunnel, especially after last night's announcement about the gradual easing of lockdown over the next few months, we're going to be looking forwards today and talking about what's next for the office space and how the creative industries can best prepare themselves for this new future. We're going to focus our talk on three separate but interrelated topics: people, place, and technology. And I'm delighted to welcome three fantastic speakers who I'm sure will offer some fascinating insights into each of these pillars. Firstly, my colleague Emma Richardson. Emma's a director of our Worksphere HR service and Lewis Silkin in-house, our flexible legal resourcing service. Emma's very much a people person and has a vast amount of experience in all aspects of HR, and is going to talk to us about the people element and how ad agencies can support their changing needs and get ahead with their flexible and hybrid working policies. Next up, we've got Anna Scally. Anna's a director at Avison Young, the global real estate advisor and agency. Anna's particular focus is on workplace project management, and she specializes in advising on how the right workplace can play a pivotal role in promoting well-being and productivity, which is something high on the agendas of many businesses at the moment. Unsurprisingly, Anna's going to be talking about place. And finally, to talk about technology, we've got Philip Ross, the founder and CEO of Unwork, specialist advisor on the new world of work. Philip's expertise lies in looking at how technologies and digital disruption will change the way we work. And he's also written a number of books on the area, including The Creative Office, the contents of which I'm sure we'll be tapping into today. As ad agencies are very people-centric and rely on collaboration and creativity, some of the issues they need to overcome differ from those in other sectors, as their stock in trade is ideas and imagination. Being separated from their colleagues has posed a number of challenges for them. Hopefully, our discussions today will offer some insights and practical tips on how creatives can adapt to the change and come out stronger in the long run. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to our panelists to say a little bit more about themselves. Anna, perhaps you'd like to start.
Hi guys, yes, my name is Anna Scally, and as Patrick said, I'm a Director of Workplace Project Management team at Avison Young. For the past 15 years or so, I've been delivering office refurbishments and fit-outs across a range of sectors and across the globe. I guess this experience, along with I've got a degree in psychology, has really sparked my interest and allowed me to gain a really good understanding around complex interactions between the occupants and their working environments, and in particular how well-being can be improved through design and boosting productivity.
Thanks, Anna. Philip, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Patrick, and good morning. It's a pleasure to join you. And as Patrick said, it's an interesting day following the announcements last night to kind of start to debate this new world of work. So I founded my business 25 years ago. We've looked at the future of work and the workplace for that time. And I guess there's never been a more interesting time to begin to define what that looks like. I do look at the world through three lenses, primarily technology, but also, of course, it's about people and having a great experience at work, and therefore place. So it's the kind of combination of those three lenses. And as Patrick said, I wrote a book called The Creative Office a few years ago, and somehow during lockdown managed to write another book on the future of work, which will get published probably at the end of this year. So that's my outlook, and hopefully we'll share some good ideas today. Thanks.
Great, well, we'll look forward to reading that later. And finally, Emma.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Richardson, and I work here at Lewis Silkin, and I'm responsible for delivering HR services to our clients. So that includes things like HR consultancy, client training, mediation services, and I also have a responsibility for helping our clients with their investigations. I also work as part of Lewis Silkin House, which is our interim lawyer service, so I have to plug that. But I'm looking forward to the panel discussion, and I'm now going to hand back to Patrick.
Great, thanks everyone. So let's crack on with some more detail now. And don't forget that if you'd like to let us know what you're thinking, do tick or cross, and do raise some questions. We'll try and get to them later on. Anna, I'll start with you, if I may. So there's been a lot of talk of hybrid working and the future office. Could you quickly explain what this is?
I'll give it a try. So yeah, I mean, basically hybrid working is a combination of working in a variety of different workspaces, be that in the office, the clients, out on set, in the studio, or at home. Now, for some, that's not going to be hugely different to how it was before. But for teams that have traditionally spent all their time in the office, this is going to have the biggest impact, and no longer is working from home going to be that rare exception. It will now be part of working life. And I think part of this discussion today, and that's why we're bringing it together, is that from my side or from a workplace, you know, we can deliver the facilities in the office, and that's hugely important to support this. But to be able to really make it successful, we need to make sure that the HR policies and the technology delivery are aligned on this. So and it's fantastic to see sort of Emma and Philip here today to sort of to show how those things need to be aligned.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned HR, so I'll move on to Emma now. Emma, how might you plan for a hybrid working approach?
Thank you. So there are 4 things that I would bring to everybody's attention, and some of them you may already have been thinking about during the lockdown period. I think the first is gathering your data. So do you actually know what your employees want in terms of their working patterns? And is that aligning with the developing strategic direction that your agency is taking? So how do you find out? So you could run surveys, you could run focus groups, you could get somebody in to have confidential conversations with people, you can talk about it at town halls. But what you want to do is really raise the expectation that you would like people to tell you what they want, at the same time balancing with everybody may not get exactly the working pattern that they do desire, but at least you will know if there is a misalignment between the strategy that you have in place and what your people want. That's the first thing, data. The second thing is to look at your documentation and make sure that you are future-proofing how your strategy is going to emerge. So does the balance between what people want and what space allocation you have going to align? So if you have everybody that says, this is great, I want to work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and not to work the Monday and the Friday, you know, I can extend my feeling of the weekend even if I'm working those days. If you've got everybody coming in those 3 days, you haven't got the flexibility for desk allocation, for the stress and strain that will place on meeting rooms, etc. And these are all the things that we've battled with pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. So it's really finding out what is that pattern that is going to work. And also we have to remember that we are a business, and you know, what do our clients want? Will our clients be happy? Can you make your creativity continue to work with the allocation of how people desire to come into the office versus working at home? I think the third point is, if you decide as an organisation, as an agency, that you are going to offer no flexibility at all, so you do expect for people who are working whether on a full-time or part-time basis, that they must be in the office, you may find that offering no flexibility at all will be a lovely golden ticket for your competitors, because undoubtedly many will be offering that flexibility, and you will then create a problem that you didn't even know you had in terms of staff retention. And then my final point, which is, I suppose, a little ironic for agencies that spend their whole time thinking about how they communicate on behalf of their clients, is thinking about how are you going to regularly communicate to both management and staff. I always find that there's a real balance, and typically people don't always get it right. But I would err on the over-communicating than under-communicating, and that could be both town hall style, written communications, teams. You know, how is this messaging about the new way of working going to be cascaded through your organisation? So those are my thoughts on how you might plan for hybrid working.
That's great. It's really interesting. I mean, I think you touched on a couple of points there. The future-proofing, the point there is, it's not just about sort of crystal ball gazing. I think you can really put measurable steps in place now, and it's not just having a random guess. You can do a bit of trial and error. You can see how things goes, and you can, you know, if you think the town hall works, run with that. If you think teams and smaller groups is better, run with that, and just see how it goes. Philip, moving on to you. So Unwork's written about the hybrid workplace as well. What's your view on it, and what do you think will be gained in the move to hybrid workplaces, particularly from the technology perspective?
Yeah, now Patrick, I think it's one of the most intriguing dilemmas now for organisations is to work out and re-envision what work looks like. You know, by and large, we've mothballed our offices for the best part of a year. People have been surprised on productivity statistics, so people have been actually quite effective at home. And in effect, we have the technology now from home, which is bypassing the office. You know, we actually don't connect back to the office building for anything. We're going straight to the cloud. So that's kind of putting a new paradigm in place for both the technology we need, but also the purpose of the office going forwards. And creative offices have always been really exciting. You know, some of my favorites, like, I don't know, Spotify in New York, actually has always been more flexible in its approach, with fantastic shared amenity, whether it's maker spaces or entertainment spaces or agile scrum, you know, project spaces based on their kind of squads and their organizational structure. So I think we'll have the ability to kind of step back and think about creative space in a very new way. The interesting thing for me is all the surveys globally point to only about 7% of people wanting to come back as it was before the pandemic, you know, mostly 5 days a week commuting to an office. And that's the biggest change. People don't want to do what they were doing before. And of the balance, about half the people want to be predominantly based at home and half want this hybrid existence. And that's global surveys from our clients in almost every sector. So you have to kind of step back and, as we heard, you know, a little bit from Emma, if you don't respond to that, people will walk when the economy re-emerges. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we can reimagine the office, because don't forget, if only over the average week 60% of people are coming in, and even with that, before the pandemic, utilization was pretty low anyway, the place will feel like a mall. It won't feel like that kind of buzzing, creative space that we want. The energy when you've made that effort to come in won't be there. So we need to reimagine the office, and I can talk a bit about what we're doing with Unwork's strategy for clients around that. But don't forget also your clients are also on this journey. They are also emerging to adopt hybrid working. So they will need a different way of interacting with their creative agencies and other partners. And so this whole world of hybrid work isn't just about your own employees, but the world that you're operating in. And we think it's a very exciting future.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I mean, I think you made a good point about the sort of the natural pause that we've got at the moment. It's lots of companies are taking stock, and you know, being away from the office gives you that context and that ability to sort of think, what do we really need whilst we've not got it? And I do think over the next few years we're certainly going to see some changes in mindset. You know, a lot of this, the outbreak took everyone by surprise. But now everyone should be aware that it's around and should be planning, as well as they can. So you sort of touched upon it already, and actually Emma touched on it a little bit earlier. Load balancing buildings in a hybrid model. So sort of, talking about the different working patterns when people do start to return. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the key, Patrick, and you heard a bit about that from Anna and Emma talking about data and the need to think about the working week. So it's back to this idea that unless we do something directed, you can't get the right environment, A, if it's left to chance, and B, if people aren't coming into the office, the atmosphere won't be there. So our view is that there's, A, the potential for dramatic cost savings. We now believe you can probably shrink the office by about 30 to 40% and remove that overhead from any kind of business or firm, which is quite a dramatic vision. So anyone with a lease event has got a great way of thinking about that, and maybe Anna can talk to that. We also think that you can't just have a random team A, team B, because if I come into the office on a Monday and Patrick, you turn up on Tuesday, and Emma decides to come in on Wednesday, but we're all working on the same pitch or the same account, it's hopeless. So we believe that you're going to have an app-based approach, and maybe I'll talk a bit about apps. Apps will be able to be the glue that allows people to provision work. It will engender the right ecosystems and tribes to kind of come back together into the office. And it will, what I would call, engineer serendipity. So when you do make the effort to come in, the others who are also in that day, you can encourage the interactions that you need to kind of get the creative juices flowing, as we discussed earlier. So we think that there's some technology coming which will be pretty essential to create this new ecosystem for work. And I think what's important is the load balancing means that the apps can nudge you when you should come in, so that the shrunken workplace can be efficient. And that's not just kind of across the Monday to Friday, that's across the cycles. Some teams might need to be in the office for, say, a very big pitch. Others might be coming in on a regular basis, or others might be coming, for example, when HR is doing comp and review, there's a more intense focus on where they need to be inside the workspace. So you need to kind of have a cycle and balance it across the weeks and the months to get this kind of more efficient workplace to be effective.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. You talked about the cycles of work. I mean, I think sort of from a legal perspective, I certainly have times when there's really intensive head down, and just it's good to be working from home and have that privacy and ability to shut yourself off. But then, we've got lots of teams that we work with, not just in my practice, not just in real estate, but across the corporate departments, litigation, and the office certainly continue to have that role where just bouncing ideas off one another will really help. And I think for the creative industries, that's possibly even more true, because it's, as I said at the beginning, it's very much a collaborative industry. So replicating that's going to be a challenge, I think. Thanks, Philip. So Anna, a two-parter now for you. Firstly, what should we be taking in? Seen Richardson Young's his report on the workplace and COVID. What's this about? Could you summarise its key points? I appreciate, again, I'm asking you to summarise a very long report, but do your best.
I'll give it a go. So let me start with taking into consideration, and I think Philip started to brush on it, but I think there's been a huge amount of talk about the office of the future. It's going to be a place to collaborate and come in, but I think one of the things we need to understand and use this time at the moment is we're not going to spend an hour and a half commuting in just to collaborate all day long and socialise and have a cup of coffee. We're going to go in there, and our working day is a variety of things. There might be task-based, there's the catching up emails, there will be the meetings, there will be the collaboration. But also, and it goes back to a little bit what we talked about what the hybrid office is that there were and there are teams that have been in the office all day long, and they don't have a role necessarily that involves collaboration. So I think what's really, really important in the first part when you're planning offices is to get under the skin of what does this business actually do, and how do the various teams work, what facilities do they need, and then start planning around there. I mean, every office will continue to need sort of a focused areas, you know, areas for concentrated work with desks or sort of the touchdown bench, small meeting rooms, focus rooms, that sort of thing. Then we need the innovative areas, the scrums, the larger meeting areas, the collaborative zones, and sort of where settings where people will allow people to work together and share ideas. And then you've got the community area, which is the breakout and the cafe areas. Again, the relaxation, but they are almost designed for those serendipitous moments of creativity. And very much at the start of this, and this is a great time before we sort of all flood back to the office, is looking at that and looking at almost imagining it's like a dial where you can dial it up and down to understand what type of facilities you need around the office and where you need those facilities as well. And that kind of leads a little bit into, you mentioned the productivity report that we did, and this is where we really explored the importance of the work environment and how that can aid productivity. And you know, this whole period has been an amazing sort of almost experimental zone whilst people have been at home. And I think very much the beginning was everyone's fantastic, we're home, we're really productive, we can get on with stuff. And as time has come on, then things have started to come out about, you know, the lack of interaction, the missing communication and that side. So what we did as part of the report was we married that against Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is very much looks at human behaviour and how our human behaviour is driven by a range of needs. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with sort of your basic physiological at the bottom, and if you apply that to sort of the workplace, your basic physiological needs are your desk, a chair, if you're lucky. I know some people unfortunately only had a bed, you know, and your laptop. And for most of us, we've been quite successful over the last sort of 10, 11 months to be able to do that. And then you move up a little bit further up the scale, and you start to sort of move up through security and then into feelings of belonging, and then accomplishment, and then up to self-actualization. So it's looking at those, what can be almost achieved in our home style, but actually to achieve self-actualization, which is where everybody is working at their best. What do we need to within an office? And that just very much comes out that it's a degree of personalization, and providing different types of workspace around the office is really how you're going to be able to, and not just in the office, but the workplace. So your workplace is no longer, and it goes back to, it's no longer just an office. Your workplace is all those variety of things that I talked about at the beginning, and be able to provide those also within the office. So say you want to, you need to, and I'll go back to what I said before, you know, you want to get in a report, you're in the office, you have a meeting, but also within that day, you don't have to then go home to write that report or to summarize what you've done during the day, but by creating quiet library areas where almost like your home environment, where it's a do not disturb, and you can turn off your phone and that sort of thing. So you can shut yourself away in the office, but still be within an office and utilize your time a lot better. So that's sort of where the productivity report and that then feeds into, let's think about how we're going to plan our office in the future to create and provide all those different sort of facilities that we need going forward. Hopefully that made some sense.
It definitely did. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, the reason for the commute is a big one, isn't it? It's you've got to make it worthwhile for someone to sit on a crowded train, hopefully less crowded than before, and get up, you know, an hour earlier, an hour and a half earlier than they need to now. I think that's important. And then, I mean, I think it's a good point. It's certainly a good point about the how you can sort of tailor facilities to specific roles. As you say, not every role, even in the creative industry, is going to need, you know, one-on-one FaceTime. It can be done remotely, or at least the majority of it can be done remotely. So I think that's something important. And then one thing that occurred to me when you were talking about the office was how important its location is as well. You know, our office is on Chancery Lane, and I love it round there. And I go in and you can get to the shops. There's lots of things on the doorstep, and it's in central London. I don't live in central London, so I'm able to meet up with friends after work, and I think that's something that's not really been, or not something I've seen talked about quite as much as the physical space inside the building. And I think that will be central to or a reason why the office is never going to just disappear. Thanks, Anna. Emma, can I ask you from the sort of the contractual side, a bit dry, from the contractual side, what do you think creators should be talking about?
Thank you, Patrick. And in fact, somebody has already posted a question about do we actually have to change employee contracts? So I think there are 3 areas that you might want to look at as a creative. The first is your flexible policy. Is it actually saying what you would like it to say? Once you've worked out what your people want and what strategically you want, you need to make sure that your flexible working policy, either to have that hybrid working of office, home, client, coffee shop, is all of that possible? And also thinking about your tech as well. Do you have privacy screens, for example, on your laptops, which will mean that your competitors aren't looking over your shoulder whilst you're sitting having your lovely latte in a coffee shop, which I'm sure we're all really looking forward to being able to do. So think about your flexible working policy. Depending on how you have set your contract of employment up and whether you have an employee handbook, a company handbook, you might need to look there because there may be references in terms of flexible working and expectations in and around that. But to go to the question that was asked about the contract of employment, typically contract of employment will state your primary place of work. And so you need to think about changing that contract of employment or reviewing it to see if that is necessary to change or not. So I would certainly recommend, and of course I would say this, let's look at legal advice, reminding everybody, my background is HR. We do obviously have a lot of lawyers at Lewis Silkin that can help you look at the contract and see what wording would be most appropriate. But as many people know, you can't unilaterally vary a contract of employment between you and the employee. So you will need to think about how you go about positioning whatever changes. Many will be welcome. So it's not necessarily a question if you're putting something in that somebody would not welcome, but you do need to think through what you need to do to change those 3 things: your flexible working policy, your company handbook, and your contract of employment. There may not need to be any changes, but there might, and you need to think about how you're going to position that with your workforce so that you are future-proofing yourself going forward. The second thing which I will mention, just because it's coming on the horizon, is the IR35 changes that are coming about as of the 6th of April. We know from speaking to our clients that about 1/3 of people have picked up where they left off last year and are in a good place in terms of migrating who will fall inside and outside of IR35 and making the necessary changes. Another 1/3 have started thinking about it, but are a little bit further behind. And we're told, and this is all clients, not necessarily just in the advertising and marketing space, we're told another 1/3 haven't yet started thinking about it. And clearly, the number of contractors and whether they can legally provide services to your agency is a key aspect of the overarching how are we going to work in a hybrid way. So I said I wouldn't dwell on it, and of course I've spent more time than I intended, but if you haven't already started thinking about IR35, please do so. The 6th of April is looming, and we do not believe that the government are going to postpone that legislation. So that is my contractual update. But Patrick, turning the tables on you, what about from your legal perspective, from the leasing side of things, what can ad marketing occupiers be doing to improve their position now and also thinking about the future?
Yeah, well, the tricky thing I think is that a lot of companies have found is that most of them are probably midway through, their lease terms. So, as you said, you can't unilaterally vary an employment contract. Just the same goes for leases. Despite all the talk about landlords and tenants working together, I think the reality is that landlords are going to look for the least worst position, and the real estate sector's too hard-nosed for it just to be altruism without any benefit for the landlord. So for now, I think what tenants can do is what they're already doing, which are rent concessions and variations. Speaking to the landlord. Those are things like paying rent monthly, paying in arrears, reductions in service charges, and those sorts of things. You could approach your landlord to see if they might accept a surrender or a re-gear, which could include maybe entering into a new lease, a reversionary lease or a new lease now in exchange for more favourable terms. So the landlord gets, it's quid pro quo of a tenant signed up for a longer term, but maybe offers you some benefit for that. And obviously also check your leases for any break clauses that are still operative, because that's your easiest way to get out. And then for the future, I think it's going to be a more interesting thing to think about, because it's going to be interesting to see what becomes market standard. I think there will be more flexibility for occupiers, which probably manifest in a few different ways. There'll inevitably be lots of new ones we can't think of yet, and things that just someone tries and it works. I think there'll probably be shorter lease terms. There will still be 10-year terms, but I think we'll probably see more 3-year leases with landlords offering a bit more of a fully fitted out space or limited delapse liabilities. Might see more tenant breaks included in leases, including rolling breaks, which means that the tenant will have the comfort knowing that they can get out of their property at a certain point if market demands it, and they've, God forbid, had a drop off in work or anything like that. Also, one point about rolling breaks is that they don't affect a landlord's asset value, so they might be a bit more acceptable to landlords as well, but they might want that to kick in midway through the term as a compromise or something like that. Another point is rent suspensions or rent reductions in the event of pandemics. I think that will become a standard clause, which will probably work a little bit like insured risks provisions do now. And I guess that the insurance market will probably adapt in the next few years. I won't talk about the recent business interruption insurance case now, which is probably you're probably grateful for. I've done a passel on it if you want to find out a little bit more. But if I was an occupier taking up new space, I'd either be making sure that our own policy has business interruption cover, or that the landlord's does. And of course, the landlord could recover that through its insurance rent. I've also seen a comment about whether there might be a sort of a pool re-style situation for pandemics, which that's to cover flooding, and it's where insurers pay capped amounts with the government then footing the bill and recouping that through instalments from the insurers, which I think it'll be interesting to see if that does develop, but it's not going to be for a few years, so occupiers really need to sort of think about that now. And then lastly, a couple of quick points is rent review. We might start to finally see some upwards, downwards rent reviews. At the moment, it's traditionally just upwards only, which means that the rent will never go down. Or possibly, we might see some form of turnover style rent review, similar to how it works in the retail sector. I've not seen anyone or heard that this actually happened in sort of corporate occupiers, but it may do. And then just one other point is, rent deposits. Tenants don't want to be having cash secured up in a landlord's bank account or in a deposit account. So there are other ways. There's guarantors or bank guarantees even that can be alternatives. If leases do get shorter, then it may be that securities or deposits aren't necessary anymore. So that was my piece. So Philip, could I just ask you a two-part question? Firstly, how do you see technology helping to overcome digital inequality on the return to work, especially when it comes to the more creative workshops? And secondly, how can those companies recreate workplace culture and rituals virtually?
No, Patrick, I think one of our interesting research areas at the moment is digital equality. At the moment we are all doing this, we're all equal. Well, there's a leveling out as we all Zoom, WebEx and Teams into each other. But as we move back to physical return to the office and hybrid working, one of the biggest questions is how do we avoid what used to happen pre-pandemic? If we rewind the clock to those horrible meetings where you have the classic rectangular meeting room, a screen at the very end of the room with tiny little images of people, and anyone dialing in remotely had a pretty grim experience. They were very much second-class citizens. Going forwards, we have to get rid of that. And one of my companies, my sister company, Cordless Consultants, has got a really interesting approach to audio-visual and video conferencing technology. I think we'll have much richer spaces going forwards, where you have immersion with video, so that the people who are in the room have the same experience as those out of the room, during the meeting, before the meeting, for the kind of preamble, and after the meeting with the coffee and the chat. And all of that can be part of a different experience. And don't forget, your clients will have the same need. They will also be working, some of them coming into a space with you to be creative, others wanting to come in remotely. And so helping to create that digital equality as to how you work with clients, I think will be fundamental. The other part of this question, which I think is really interesting, is the data that's coming. I don't know how many of you are on Microsoft 365, I guess many. And as part of our work, we have now an analytics team, which are Microsoft Workplace Analytics accredited. Now, what does that mean? It means that we can look at the data in Microsoft 365 and see how people are working. Now, there's a lot of interesting areas of that. It can talk to the idea that within your agency, it can track and map who's connecting with whom via email, Outlook, calendar, events, Teams, and so on. And therefore, you can identify the tribes and the clusters and bring those people back together when they need to come into the physical space. And that's looking at the real work that's taking place. And that could include the interactions with clients and others. It can do other things. We talked about hybrid work, and it's not one size fits all. So this is an opportunity to kind of celebrate, we think, diversity and inclusion. People have different personal circumstances, different preferences, but also different needs by job role and by anything to psychometrics and so on. And therefore, we can adopt this kind of heterogeneous approach, which I think the data will help understand. And we think that's even more important for the younger generation, those that haven't built their social capital, those that still need training and mentoring. And the data can show that and therefore bring them back at the same time as the people that need to train them and mentor them, so they're in the space together. So I think that that's part of it. And your other point around the ceremonies, which does touch on the idea of agile Scrum methodology, this idea of pairing and of the various ceremonies, the stand-ups and so on. We do think that the workplace will have to cater for ceremonies. Anna touched on that a little bit, but much more an approach around bespoke spaces. Some of them high-tech, some of them don't need to be high-tech, but those bespoke spaces used for particular activities and tasks during the working day.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Emma, turning to you, how might the new normal be different? I mean, Philip's touched sort of upon the concept of presenteeism, for example. What can companies do to overcome that?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because as Philip has just alluded to, the people in the room tend to have more of an influence than the people dialing in. So it is about thinking about what technology can really improve that experience. But it's also about the self-discipline of the people in the room to make sure that they are, including people who are dialing in. So chairing of meetings is always reasonably important, but making sure that everybody has the opportunity to speak becomes even more important. It's very difficult to read body language when you are looking at somebody, and if you've got 4 people in a room and 2 people dialing in, they can be inadvertently excluded. So making them feel part of the discussion. But I think that the one thing to really look out for is the meeting concludes, you've agreed what the next steps are going to be in terms of the creative campaign that you've just been talking about. Meeting finishes, and then the 4 people who remain in the room continue the conversation. And so the 2 people who dialed in are oblivious to that ongoing conversation, which could be in the meeting room, it could be at the water cooler, it could be over lunch. And then all of a sudden you've got a slightly different take on what the next steps are going to be, what the campaign is going to look like, and you are going to ostracize the people that weren't in the room. And that might not be a fixed thing, because the following week it might be a different group of people who are in the room versus out. So there does need to be a little bit of self-discipline and personal responsibility to make sure that everybody feels included, and different organisations will have different ways of going about that, but technology can definitely assist with that. So yeah, think about that presenteeism, and think about the culture and the power shift that may exist for people in the room.
And if I could jump on that, Emma, because that's so right. I mean, the other frustrations we're seeing from the research is the sketching and the whiteboarding. You know, in the room you can annotate, you can show somebody a creative idea. It's very difficult to get that same experience remotely unless we get this really well thought through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this touches upon my next question for you, actually, Philip, is to do with sort of rising third space or localized working. Sort of, do you think that's a good idea? What do you think the impact will be of that?
Yeah, and I saw a question coming in on that as well. I think it's not this binary discussion about the home and the office. There are now many spaces in between, Patrick, and I think that as part of a property portfolio, you can now begin to think about where else people can work. We have technology now, we can carry the technology with us, and therefore there are very few constraints to where that could be. So, no, we predict a huge emergence in third spaces. We know the current offer, and whether it's a kind of WeWork or spaces, or the more interesting creative approaches like Soho Works, we think that there's a membership approach coming back, and I see it as the reinvention of the guild. Actually, you know, we look at our ancient cities, and guild buildings were the first incarnation of a physical space where people from a like-minded professional skill would gather together, and we now see this re-emerging. So we see specialist micro-hubs by industry coming through. You know, if you're a creative working for the insurance sector, you might go to an insurance co-work space as opposed to just a creative space, and I think that landscape will change very quickly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, the sort of the central hubs for different types of work. Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Anna, what's your view on the sort of this fabled hub and spoke approach generally, and do you think we'll need less office space square footage in the future? I think you're on mute, Anna.
Probably the first one. The 10 months. And I think it's really interesting. I think from our recent research, we did a sort of fit for future research recently, where we served a large number of people, and we found 85% of our respondents expect the state to be more flexible. And interesting, 20% are looking to disperse their portfolio closer to their workforce and not their customers or their clients, which is an interesting way to see it. But at the moment, I think change takes time. And I think whilst in the short term we may see an increase in vacancies in businesses getting rid of space and reducing their portfolio, I don't think we're not seeing this as necessarily as a long-term structural shift around it. However, having said that, you know, Standard Chartered have recently come to an agreement with AWG on this sort of flexible office provision and a work near home, and the hub and spoke that's been talked about, which has the potential to change how we work, but also make us our city. We're looking very much at that, you know, with this hub and spoke, it gives towns the potential to almost have a new daytime populations as opposed to nighttime. You talked very much before about working in the city and meeting up with friends, you know, in the city at night time, but by having these almost hub and spokes and creating these facilities that Philip just talked about with like-minded people, there are some really great opportunities for towns to re-liven up their spaces and their retail areas going forward. But to come back to, do we think we need less space in the office? I think potentially there is that, but I still think it's too early, and I think we all need to, I think we have an ideal about how we want to work in the future, but I think it's going to take a good 6 months, 12 months, maybe more, until we all settle back down and really understand how this is all working, and therefore then what impact that has on the amount of space we actually occupy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've seen the work near home idea, sort of concept coming. That's much more common. But it's not just working from home. There's much more, space around you, and that towns point is definitely very interesting because, as you say, people flood into a city and then they flood out of the city at night. So it would be really interesting to see over the next few years if that there is a shift there. Thanks, Anna. So, Philip, can I ask you, what technologies will creative agencies be using to enhance their employee experience?
Yeah, no, thanks, Patrick. I think I'd just focus on two thoughts. And actually, let's use the technology. I'm going to ask our attendees to use the tick and the cross. If you currently have a workplace app within your agency or firm, if you can just click on the green tick, and maybe we can use the red cross if you don't, so it's nice and clear. Let's just see how many people have got an app and how many don't. But to my mind, look, we're all using apps in our day-to-day life, whether it's a Deliveroo or an Uber, and I think that'll be no different to how we get back to work in a logical way. And that app will nudge you. It's not just about self-service. We're now going to see artificial intelligence and machine learning, so it will make suggestions as we experience it with Netflix. So Patrick, it will say that the best day for you to come into the Lewis Silkin office will be on Thursday, and it's because 5 of your colleagues also working on this matter have chosen to be in, and there's drinks after work. So it will nudge you and make suggestions and achieve that load balancing. Likewise, it might say, actually, there's a free space in the local co-work space near to where you live, and you can enjoy life with the community as well. So the app will guide you. So mostly red crosses, 1 or 2 ticks here, which is great news. And the app will also help you in a whole range of other aspects. It will engineer serendipity. It will help you book a space that you need. It will help you with the kind of other aspects of your life, whether it's booking vacation or filing expenses. So we do see kind of one app for everything. But the other side of the technology, we think, is the certainty that people will expect more well-being from work and the workplace. And this leads me to the last point, which is the idea of the smart workspace. And that's built on the Internet of Things, this incredible new technology coming through to enable our physical spaces to be smart. And one of the things we think is that all your workspaces will need to begin to use sensors. And those sensors will measure things like occupancy. So they'll tell you how many people are in and measure the use of your space. But more importantly, they'll measure the quality of your space. The pollutants, the air quality, the temperature, the humidity will all now be measured. And you can do this either by adding sensors or actually by using what we have, the audio-visual kit, the cameras, and what goes with it can do the sensing for you, actually. So we believe people will expect wellness to be quite high on the agenda, and we can enable that technology to be part of the physical spaces going forwards.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really interesting. Just so you know, we've had loads of questions in, and I don't think we're going to get to all of them today. We'll try and answer a few. I think we'll skip my last question, Emma, that I know you're primed to ask me, and we'll try and get to some of those listener questions. Emma, I don't know if you've seen any that you'd like to ask any of the panelists. I'm just going to have a quick look.
Yes, one of the questions that was asked was, what's IR35? Apologies. This is a piece of legislation that puts criteria around when an individual who is working as a contractor can continue to work as a contractor, or whether they will have to be paid and taxed at source, e.g. PAYE. And there is a lot of material that is out there in terms of how you make that assessment, and indeed the government has got a assessed determination tool. We will send some follow-up information on that. There was another question on working on the commute. What are our views on that? I'll give you the non-legal view. My non-legal view is I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think people can really fully work whilst on the train. Having said that, I used to do it, but I would answer emails. Of course, it's very difficult to talk to clients when you're on the train. You go through tunnels and you haven't got the privacy that you need. But so the non-legal response is I wouldn't advise it. Those are the first two that came through. The final question that I noted was the big question, the elephant in the room, what about vaccines? Yeah. I could talk about vaccines for the next 2 hours. So what I'm going to do is make sure that all of our advice on vaccinations, whether you can insist on them, what do you do if somebody refuses, we will make sure that our FAQs, our latest FAQs on vaccinations are sent as a follow-up.
Great. So I've seen another question. Philip, and I'm just going to read this verbatim. Philip expects a 30 to 40% drop in space requirements for offices. I relocate companies moving offices, and we have tried to introduce a flexible working ratio of 8 desks for 10 people. With social distancing, this means we need to spread people. Philip, what's your thoughts about sort of that whole concept of social distancing versus less space, and how that will play out?
Yeah, I think those ratios, the desk ratios, if I can be controversial, are probably, to my mind, are dead constructs, because it's not about desks anymore. And I think that's the key. I mean, you know, the work we can now do at a desk, you know, on our own with a screen, will be more and more done at home. I mean, people will ask for what is the purpose for me making that commute and journey into the office. So I think it's about the activities. So I think the office will be far fewer desks, is the kind of short answer to that. And the old school desk ratios, I think, are gone completely. I think we'll spread our activities through the week, and we'll come in for those activities which are about being with people. And I did mention that, obviously, in between that, you need to maybe go and find some focused work. But by and large, if we're going to do more and more through video, the office will provide some more specialist spaces when there's group video and multiple spaces that are needed. But that kind of solo conference like we're doing now could be done equally well at home. So I think the overall reduction in space comes from a broader reimagining of what the workplace is for. So your agency has a space that represents the brand, that's about your client experience, that's about the purpose for people when they do come in to have the creative sparks, the training, the mentoring, and to feel that belonging. But it can be reinvented, perhaps more like a home for the agency, as opposed to a kind of container for desks.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of touched upon a question that's come in as well, actually, and one I'll ask Anna, because she's sort of the expert on this, if I may. So wellness is getting a lot of focus under our current circumstances. Can you see any changes or developments in this when people are back in the office more regularly?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's incredible. I've been talking probably about health and wellbeing, wellness in the office for over 5 years, and it's now coming to the fore. And a lot of the wellness and the side that I talked about is, I think, air quality is going to be a huge thing that's going to come to the fore. And what is the air quality in the office? We've all been lucky enough, hopefully a lot of us, to have natural daylight where we're working much closer to windows where we are at home compared to potentially in the office, and a lot more greenery around us. So those are sort of 3 big things that very immediately come to mind that I can see coming into the office and are very important. But also we've had that ability, and it's come out in the leasing reports, is that whilst we're at home, we have that ability to break out, work in different spaces, and have a little bit more me time and downtime. And I think that's going to be very, very important to make sure that we are incorporating those facilities within the workplace. And that also leads then to my last thing around wellness. Wellness is providing different types of facilities and spaces to do different things through the day. So we talked a little bit, and Philip and I, sort of about the different places to do work, but it's also very important to make sure that we create different spaces to have the downtime and the breaking away from work at the same time. So I think it's a really, personally, I think it's a really exciting time that all this stuff that we've been talking about, health and well-being, and the statistics and the facts and the data that's behind it, is finally come to the fore, that we can actually sort of show and start to introduce it. Definitely.
One other small point to add, I mean, I totally agree with all Anna's thoughts, is just the idea of a touchless building as part of well-being. We've just finished some work with 22 Bishopsgate in London, which is now going to be a fantastic smart building. And of course, your mobile phone will be your kind of remote control. So actually, you can get into the building with biometrics. You can get right the way to your floor without touching a single thing. And I think that technology experience people will become more and more familiar with and therefore expect.
We're running out of time, and there are loads of questions I don't think we'll get to today, but I promise we'll follow up on them. So could I ask everyone to just do their sort of 3 top tips from today? Anna, could you drop us 3 top tips?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think 3 things I would say is, firstly, use the time now to explore how your business works and how your people work, and therefore look to see what different facilities you want to introduce, which then leads me nicely quickly into the second one, which is not everything needs to change at once. So experiment by making smaller targeted interventions and see how they're used, and then introduce them wider. And be prepared to listen and learn and adapt. So, you know, we're Avison Young, we are launching an experimental zone. We're very lucky. We've set aside and equipped a large part of our London office as an experimental zone. And we're going to test and monitor and learn more about ourselves and what we really need from our workspace and technology and HR practices to therefore enable us to do our best. And I think I definitely use this time now and try and do that. It's not a big bang. A gradual inclusion. And then the final thing then leads off on that is, with these new facilities, and I'm sure that Philip will support me, is that we need new ways to think about how the space is managed. And that's not only just with the apps, but also from your FM operations, your facilities operations. You can very much lead a horse to water, but I think in this new ways of working within the office and these new facilities, we need to be prepared to also teach people how to drink. And it's sort of new. It's a concierge style operation, so there'll be someone there so moving away from just with your client concierge, it's very much with your employees and in the office concierge to help guide people through the space, reinforcing the rules of engagement and how to use the space, and being on hand basically to help with everything from IT and AV issues to how do you use the new touchless coffee machine. So I think it's a very much moving forward and creating a new way of looking at the office.
Yeah, good luck getting everyone trained up on using new tech. That's always fun. Philip, what about you? What's your 3 top tips?
Patrick, yeah, look, I'll give you 3 kind of takeaways. One is data. You know, get some evidence. You know, we'd be really happy as in our work to help you understand your Microsoft 365 data, to show how people are really working, to inform what you could or should do for the future of workplace. So the first thing for me is evidence. The second is be bold. I mean, this is a fantastic moment to kind of step back, you know, to unbundle the assumptions and unravel some of the kind of ways that you've been working previously and come up with a fantastic vision for how your workplace could or should be in the future, based on some of the things that we've all talked about today. And then test that with your people and your clients and others. And then finally, get the technology right. So 2 or 3 key ingredients. You need an app, and we can look at some of those with you. There are plenty on the market. They're very straightforward. You need much better audio, visual, and video conferencing technologies, not just for this, but for the collaboration that is the kind of the core of creative work. And you need to be smart and enable smart space so that you can achieve both the idea of new experience for people and model that experience, but also the idea of well-being for work.
Thanks, Philip. Emma?
So echo a little bit about what Philip has just said. So that is gathering the data, what do your employees want, review the flexible working policies, your handbook, look at your contracts of employment, and referencing a question, health and safety. So health and safety, home use of equipment has been something we've done on an emergency basis thus far. Going forward, you will need to think about how you are looking after your employees whilst they are working remotely, and that could be at home or at a coffee shop or wherever. And then the final point is think about your culture. You know, is it where you want it to be after this last 12 months, and what changes would you like to see going forward for the next 12, 24, 48 months?
Thanks, Emma. And just for me, 3 quick ones. Firstly, review your current lease. and ideally ask your lawyer. We can help to give you a quick call and chat through your options and if there's any breaks, etc., etc. Secondly, for new space, negotiate as much flexibility into your lease as possible. I touched upon all of those earlier, the shorter terms, rolling breaks, fewer restrictions on assignment, more freedom around alterations, guarantees instead of rent deposits, and then finally planning ahead. I mean, I think the pandemic taught everyone that things can happen quickly and they can be unexpected. So try and future-proof yourself and think, you know, what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I didn't actually talk about this earlier, but composite deals is something that we're seeing now, particularly for the sort of the bigger networks, which is where you might team up with a flexible working operator so that you can expand and contract over the sort of the lifespan of your lease. So that's just another thing to think about. Okay, so we're running out of time, or run out of time. Thanks everyone for all the questions. I promise we will do our very best to answer as many of them as possible. I think some of them we've done. We'll follow up later this week with that and with the recording, which you can pass on to colleagues. One final thing is I just mentioned for sort of occupiers out there, we're having another 3-part session starting late March, which is headed up by head of construction Claire Eddy and real estate partner Rachel Francis Lang, which is occupiers and developers, a deeper dive. So that'll be really interesting for some of the more real estate side. And so, yeah, sorry it's all rushed at the end, but on behalf of all the other panelists, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks very much.